The first thing Victoria noticed when consciousness finally claimed her wasn't the unfamiliar ceiling or the scent of coffee drifting from another room. It was the silence. No roaring engines, no shouting voices, no clash of bottles or the metallic click of weapons being cleaned. Just the gentle creak of old wood settling and the distant whisper of wind through cornstalks. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her skull like a white-hot knife. Her hand flew to her temple, finding gauze wrapped carefully around her head. The bandage was clean, professionally done, though her fingertips came away with the faintest trace of dried blood. "Easy there." The voice was gentle, tinged with a Midwestern drawl that spoke of wide-open spaces and unhurried days. "You took quite a knock to the head." Victoria turned toward the sound and found herself looking at a man she didn't recognize, tall and lean, with calloused hands that spoke of honest work and eyes the color of storm clouds. His dark hair was touched with premature gray at the temples, and worry lines creased his weathered face. He stood in the doorway holding a steaming mug, uncertainty written in every line of his posture. "I'm Samuel," he said, setting the coffee on a nightstand carved from what looked like reclaimed barnwood. "Samuel Hartwell. This is my home. You've been unconscious for 2 days." 2 days. Victoria tried to process this information, but her thoughts felt sluggish, wrapped in cotton. She looked around the room. Simple furniture, handmade quilts, family photos on the dresser. Everything spoke of quiet lives lived with dignity despite modest means. "I don't," she began, then stopped. The words felt foreign on her tongue, as if she'd forgotten how to speak. "I can't remember how I got here." Something flickered across Samuel's face. Was it relief? "There was an accident. Your motorcycle went off the road during the storm. I found you unconscious in the ditch." He gestured toward the window where weak morning sunlight filtered through gingham curtains. "You're lucky to be alive." Victoria followed his gaze and saw her reflection in the window glass. A stranger's face stared back at her. Sharp cheekbones, full lips, dark hair matted with dried sweat and rain. But it was her eyes that unsettled her most. They looked older than she felt, as if they'd seen things that her mind mercifully couldn't recall. "What's my name?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Samuel's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "You don't remember?" She shook her head, immediately regretting the movement as fresh pain bloomed behind her eyes. "Nothing. I mean, I remember some things, general things. I know what coffee is, what a motorcycle is, but I can't remember my name, where I was going, where I came from." Panic began to claw at the edges of her consciousness. "God, I can't remember anything about myself." "Victoria." Samuel's voice was soft, careful. "Your license says Victoria Cross. You're from Denver." "Victoria." She rolled the name around in her mind, waiting for the spark of recognition that never came. "Victoria Cross," she repeated. "That doesn't sound right. I feel like it should be something else." Samuel set down his mug and moved closer, his movements slow and non-threatening. "The doctor in town said head injuries can cause memory problems. Sometimes it's temporary. You took me to a doctor?" "Doc Peterson. He's been the only doctor within 50 miles for the past 30 years. He checked you over, said there was no sign of skull fracture, but—" Samuel trailed off, his gaze dropping to something beyond her line of sight. "But what?" "Your jacket, the patches on it. Doc Peterson recognized them. You're part of a motorcycle club, the Hell Angels. Not exactly the kind of folks we see around here." Victoria looked down at herself for the first time, realizing she was wearing clothes that weren't hers. A simple cotton nightgown that smelled of lavender and sunshine. "Where are my clothes?" "I had to cut the jacket off you. There was a lot of blood. Your other things are in the wash." Samuel's voice carried a weight she couldn't identify. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you remember anything about your life with the club? Anything at all?" She searched her mind, grasping for memories that remained frustratingly out of reach. All she found was darkness and the vague sense that she was supposed to be someone else entirely. Someone softer, someone who wanted to help people instead of what? "No," she whispered. "I don't remember any of it. When I try to think about who I am, I keep seeing myself in scrubs, studying medical textbooks. But that doesn't make sense, does it? Not if I'm really part of a motorcycle gang. The look that crossed Samuel's face then was something between hope and terror, as if her words had confirmed both his greatest wish and his deepest fear. Samuel cleared his throat, and Victoria caught something shifting in his expression, like a man deciding whether to step across a threshold he could never uncross. Medical textbooks, he repeated slowly. You remember studying medicine? Not exactly remembering. More like echoes. Victoria pressed her fingertips to her temples, trying to coax the fragments into something whole. I can see myself hunched over books, highlighting passages about anatomy. I remember the smell of the library, the weight of a stethoscope around my neck during clinicals, but it feels like someone else's life. Samuel moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the cornfields stretching toward the horizon. Maybe it was your life? Before. Before what? Before whatever happened to make you join a motorcycle gang. He turned back to her, and she saw something in his storm-gray eyes that made her breath catch. People don't usually go from wanting to heal folks to running with the Hell Angels without something breaking them first. The words hit her like a physical blow. Breaking. Yes, that felt right somehow. The sense that something fundamental inside her had shattered, leaving only jagged pieces behind. But what? And when? I should go, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. I'm putting you in danger just by being here, aren't I? If I'm really part of what you say I am, where would you go? Samuel's question was gentle but pointed. You don't remember where you came from, where you were heading. You don't even remember what your life looks like. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. He was right. She was a stranger to herself, adrift in a world that felt both foreign and oddly comforting. The simple farmhouse, with its handmade furniture and the lingering scent of bacon from breakfast, felt more like home than anything she could actually remember. Tell me about this place, she said instead. About you. Maybe if I understand where I am, I can figure out where I belong. Samuel returned to his chair, settling into it like a man accustomed to long conversations during quiet evenings. Not much to tell. This farm has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it during the Depression with money he saved working the railroad. My father expanded it, added the back 40 and the equipment barn. I inherited it 8 years ago when he passed. And your family now? The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Samuel's hands tightened around his coffee mug, and Victoria immediately regretted asking. I had a wife, he said finally, Emma, and a daughter, Lucy. They died 3 years ago in a car accident on Highway 34, black ice. The stark simplicity of his words somehow made them more devastating than any elaborate explanation could have been. Victoria felt an unexpected ache in her chest, a sympathy so sharp it surprised her. I'm sorry, she whispered. The farm's been quiet since then. Too quiet, most days. Samuel's gaze drifted to the family photos on the dresser, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. Sometimes I think about selling it, moving somewhere that doesn't echo with their laughter. But then I remember that this place is all I have left of them. Victoria followed his gaze to the photographs, and something twisted in her stomach. Longing, she realized. She was looking at evidence of a life filled with love and loss and meaning, and it made her desperately want something she couldn't name. What's it like? She asked. Having a life that matters to someone else? Samuel looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I keep trying to imagine someone missing me right now. Someone wondering where Victoria Cross is, worried that she hasn't come home. But I can't picture it. I can't imagine anyone caring enough to worry. The admission felt like exposing a wound. Even if my memories came back tomorrow, would there be anything worth remembering? Or just more emptiness? Everyone matters to someone, Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Do they? Victoria touched the gauze around her head, thinking about the Hell Angel's jacket with patches she couldn't remember earning. What if the life I can't remember wasn't worth living? What if losing my memory was the best thing that ever happened to me? The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11, its deep notes reverberating through the farmhouse. Samuel stood and moved to collect her empty water glass, but paused at the nightstand. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Your motorcycle. When I found you, the engine was still running, but the bike was lying on its side in the ditch. There weren't any skid marks on the road, no sign that you tried to brake or swerve. It was like you just fell off." "What are you saying?" Samuel met her eyes, and she saw fear there, not of her, but for her. "I'm saying maybe your accident wasn't an accident at all." Victoria's blood turned to ice water in her veins. "What do you mean, not an accident?" Before Samuel could answer, the sound of approaching engines cut through the morning stillness like chainsaws through silk. Multiple motorcycles, their rumbling growing louder as they drew closer to the farmhouse. Samuel's face went pale, and he moved quickly to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. "Christ," he breathed. "There's got to be 6 of them. Maybe more." Victoria struggled to sit up straighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Are they hell angels? Same patches as your jacket?" Samuel turned from the window, his expression grim. "They're stopping at the end of the driveway." The engines died one by one, leaving behind a silence that felt pregnant with menace. Victoria could hear voices now, rough male voices discussing something in tones too low to make out words. Then the sound of heavy boots on gravel, moving toward the house. "I should go to them," Victoria said, though every instinct she didn't know she possessed screamed against the idea. "If they're looking for me—" "No." Samuel's voice was sharp, final. "Something's not right about this. If they were just worried club members looking for their missing friend, they would have called out, identified themselves. They're being too careful, too quiet." A knock echoed through the house, 3 sharp raps that somehow managed to sound more like a threat than a greeting. Samuel and Victoria locked eyes, and in that moment, she saw him make a decision that would change everything. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't come out no matter what you hear." Samuel, no. But he was already moving, pulling the bedroom door closed behind him as he headed for the front of the house. Victoria heard his footsteps cross the living room, heard the front door creak open on hinges that needed oil. "Help you gentlemen with something?" Samuel's voice carried clearly through the farmhouse, carefully neutral but with steel underneath. "Morning." The responding voice was gravelly, seasoned by cigarettes and whiskey. "We're looking for someone, a woman, goes by the name Viper. Her bike was found abandoned about a quarter mile down your road." Viper. The name hit Victoria like a slap, not with recognition but with revulsion. She couldn't remember being called that, but somehow the very sound of it made her skin crawl. "Haven't seen anyone," Samuel replied. "Been a quiet few days out here." "That's so." A different voice this time, younger but no less dangerous. "See, that's interesting because we found blood on the road, trail leading toward your property. Now, you wouldn't be lying to us, would you, farmer?" Victoria's hands began to shake. These men weren't here to rescue a missing club member. The menace in their voices, the careful way they were probing Samuel's responses, this felt like a hunt. "I said I haven't seen anyone." Samuel's voice had hardened. "Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." A laugh, cold and humorless. "Your property? That's funny. See, our friend Viper, she's got something that belongs to us, something real important, and we're not leaving until we get it back." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Course you don't." Heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. "Mind if we take a look around, just to satisfy our curiosity?" Victoria felt panic claw at her throat. Whatever these men wanted, it wasn't a reunion. And Samuel, kind, gentle Samuel who'd saved her life and asked nothing in return, was standing between them and their quarry, facing down God knew how many armed men to protect a woman he barely knew. She looked around the bedroom desperately, searching for something that might help her understand what was happening. Her gaze fell on a small mirror hanging on the wall, and she caught sight of her reflection again. But this time, instead of seeing a stranger, she saw something else in her own eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before, a coldness that felt both foreign and familiar. The voices outside were growing more heated. Samuel's refusal to grant them entry clearly trying their patience. Victoria knew she had seconds to make a choice that would determine not just her fate, but Samuel's as well. She could walk out there, surrender herself to these men and whatever they wanted from her. It would save Samuel, remove the danger from his doorstep. But every instinct warned her that going with them would mean death. Not just for her, but for Samuel too, because he'd seen too much, knew too much. Or she could stay hidden, let Samuel continue to shield her, and hope they'd eventually give up and leave. But the determination in their voices suggested that wasn't likely. The third option crystallized in her mind like frost forming on glass. She could fight. The thought should have terrified her. She was injured, outnumbered, and couldn't remember the first thing about violence or self-defense. But somehow, buried beneath the confusion and fear, she sensed something darker stirring to life, something that whispered she was far more dangerous than she appeared. Victoria Cross might be a stranger to herself, but Viper, whoever she was, had left her gifts behind. But as Victoria's hand reached for the bedroom door handle, her fingers froze. The coldness in her reflection had shaken something loose, not a memory but a feeling, a sick, hollow sensation that felt like looking into an abyss and recognizing something of herself staring back. What if fighting comes naturally because I'm exactly the kind of person these men say I am? Her hand fell away from the door as doubt crashed over her like a wave. The medical textbooks, the desire to help people, what if those were just childish dreams, discarded long ago in favor of something darker? What if the woman called Viper wasn't some foreign entity that had possessed Victoria Cross, but who she'd chosen to become? From the front porch, she heard Samuel's voice growing more strained. "I've told you 3 times now, there's no one here but me. You're welcome to check with Sheriff Morrison if you don't believe me." "Sheriff Morrison's got his own problems today," came the gravelly reply. "Seems someone broke into the evidence locker last night. Funny how these things happen." Victoria's stomach twisted. Evidence locker. Whatever she'd supposedly stolen, it was serious enough that these men had corrupted local law enforcement. And Samuel, honest, grieving Samuel who'd lost everything that mattered to him, was standing in their crosshairs because of her. She pressed her back against the bedroom door, her mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. If she surrendered, they'd kill them both. If she hid, Samuel would eventually pay the price for protecting her. If she fought, "If I fight, I become Viper again." The thought terrified her more than the armed men outside. What if the coldness she'd glimpsed in her reflection wasn't some survival instinct, but her true nature? What if reclaiming those buried skills meant losing whatever remained of the woman who'd once dreamed of healing people? "Look, friend," one of the bikers said, his voice taking on a falsely reasonable tone. "We know she's here. We tracked her bike, followed the blood trail. Why don't you make this easy on yourself and just step aside? And why don't you get the hell off my property before I call the state police?" A moment of silence, then the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "That wouldn't be smart, farmer. See, we're not really the negotiating type, and our friend Viper, well, she's cost us a lot of money. Someone's got to pay for that." Victoria's hands began to shake again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from rage. These men were threatening to kill an innocent man, someone who'd shown her nothing but kindness because of something she'd supposedly done, something she couldn't even remember. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She couldn't remember. For all she knew, she deserved whatever they planned to do to her. Maybe Viper had earned this reckoning. Maybe the woman who'd once studied medicine had died long ago, replaced by someone who stole evidence and ran with criminals and left trails of blood in her wake. The weight of not knowing pressed down on her like a physical thing. How could she make a choice about who to be when she didn't know who she'd been? How could she trust instincts that might belong to a monster? What if saving Samuel means becoming something that makes his sacrifice meaningless? Through the thin walls, she heard the sound of more footsteps, the other bikers spreading out, surrounding the house. Soon they'd stop asking permission and simply take what they'd come for. Samuel's courage was admirable, but he was a farmer facing down what sounded like a small army. Victoria looked around the bedroom again, noting details she'd missed before. No photos of Samuel with the Hell Angels, no hidden weapons or drug paraphernalia, just the quiet artifacts of a man who'd built his life around love and loss and honest work, a man who'd carried a bleeding stranger into his home and asked nothing in return but the chance to help her heal. Whatever she'd been before, whatever Viper had done to earn the attention of these men, Samuel didn't deserve to pay for it. But how could she protect? Without becoming the very thing that had brought danger to his doorstep. The voices outside grew more heated, Samuel's refusal clearly wearing thin their patience. Any moment now, they'd stop talking and start acting. She had to choose, surrender and hope they'd spare him, knowing they wouldn't, hide and watch him die protecting her secret, or fight and risk discovering that the darkness in her reflection was all she'd ever really been. Victoria's hand moved toward the door handle again, then stopped. In the mirror across the room, she caught another glimpse of herself, not the hardness this time, but something else, fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of living with the wrong choice. Fear that saving Samuel might damn them both. The woman in medical scrubs felt like a dream, but the coldness that promised swift, brutal solutions, that felt terrifyingly real. The sound of splintering wood from the front door shattered Victoria's paralysis. Samuel's sharp curse carried through the house, followed by heavy boots crossing the threshold. They were done talking. Victoria's hand closed around the door handle with sudden, absolute certainty. In that moment, she realized she'd been asking herself the wrong question. It wasn't about whether she was Viper or Victoria, whether she was good or evil, whether she deserved what was coming. The only question that mattered was whether she could live with Samuel's death on her conscience, and the answer was a resounding no. She stepped into the hallway just as three bikers forced Samuel to his knees in the living room. The man with the gravelly voice, older, gray-bearded, with scars crisscrossing his knuckles, had a pistol trained on the back of Samuel's head. Two others flanked him, their leather cuts displaying patches Victoria didn't recognize but somehow understood spoke of violence and rank. "Well, well," Graybeard said when he spotted her. "There's our missing princess. Looking a little worse for wear, aren't you, Viper?" Victoria stepped fully into the room, her hands raised but ready. Something strange was happening to her vision. Details were becoming sharper, distances more precise. The leader's gun hand trembled slightly from old nerve damage. The younger biker on the left favored his right leg, probably an old injury. The third man kept glancing toward the windows, nervous about exposure. "Let him go," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Whatever you want from me, he's not part of it." "Oh, but he is now." Graybeard's smile was all teeth and malice. "See, Farmer Boy here has seen our faces, heard our voices. That makes him a liability. But don't worry, we'll make it quick, professional courtesy and all." Samuel's eyes met hers across the room, and she saw something that broke her heart: acceptance. He'd known this was how it would end the moment he'd decided to protect her, and he'd done it anyway. A good man, choosing to shield a stranger even when it cost him everything. That acceptance triggered something deep in Victoria's chest. Not the cold calculation she'd feared, but something far more dangerous. Fury, pure protective rage that burned away her doubts like morning frost before sunlight. She didn't choose to become Viper in that moment. She chose to become whatever she needed to be to save Samuel Hartwell. "You want me to come quietly?" Victoria asked, taking a careful step forward. "Fine. But first, tell me what I supposedly stole that's worth killing an innocent man over." The chemist's formula. Graybeard's eyes never left her face, along with the only existing samples. "Our employer is very eager to get them back." The words meant nothing to her conscious mind, but somewhere deeper, she felt a flicker of recognition. A formula. Samples, important enough to kill for, which meant important enough to use as leverage. "And if I don't remember where I put them?" "Then you'll remember real quick once we start working on your farmer friend here." Victoria nodded slowly as if considering his terms. Then she smiled, and even she could feel how wrong it looked on her face. "There's just one problem with that plan." The nervous biker by the window shifted his weight. "What's that?" You assume I care enough about him to give you what you want. Victoria's voice had gone flat, empty of warmth. But what if I don't? What if I'm exactly the kind of person who'd watch you torture him and feel nothing at all? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Graybeard's features. You're bluffing. Am I? Victoria took another step forward, her movement suddenly predatory. I don't remember being Viper, but I remember being pre-med. You know what they teach you in anatomy class? All the places you can hurt someone without killing them. All the nerve clusters that cause maximum pain with minimal effort. The lie rolled off her tongue like silk, but there was enough truth underneath. Some buried knowledge that made her threats ring with authenticity. She could see it in their faces, the growing realization that they might have miscalculated. Maybe I'll make you a counteroffer, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. You let Samuel walk out that front door, and I'll come with you quietly. No fuss, no drama. But if you hurt him, she let the sentence hang unfinished, and in that silence, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. The threshold between who she'd been and who she was becoming dissolved like sugar in rain. There was no going back from this moment, no retreating to the safety of Samuel's spare bedroom and pretending she was just an injured woman with amnesia. The Hell Angels had come looking for Viper. Now they were about to find her. Graybeard's pistol wavered slightly, uncertainty clouding his features. In that heartbeat of hesitation, Victoria moved. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Muscle memory buried so deep that amnesia couldn't touch it. She dove left as the gun fired, the bullet splintering wood where she'd been standing. The nervous biker by the window lunged forward, but Victoria was already rolling, her shoulder connecting with his knees in a move that sent him crashing into the coffee table. Samuel threw himself sideways, knocking Graybeard off balance. The older man stumbled, cursing, his second shot going wide. Victoria came up from her roll with something in her hand. When had she grabbed the brass lamp from the end table and swung it in a vicious arc that caught the third biker across the temple? He dropped like a felled tree. Behind you! Samuel's warning came just as Graybeard recovered his footing. Victoria spun, the lamp still in her grip, and found herself face to face with the man who'd been ready to execute Samuel without a second thought. His gun was rising toward her chest, and for a frozen moment, she stared down the barrel and saw her death. Then Samuel's shoulder hit Graybeard from behind, sending both men sprawling across the living room floor. The gun skittered away under the couch, and suddenly the odds had shifted dramatically. Victoria stood over the chaos, breathing hard, staring at the three downed bikers with a mixture of shock and something uncomfortably close to satisfaction. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Her vision remained sharp, calculating, noting that the nervous one was reaching for something in his boot, that Graybeard was trying to crawl toward a backup piece holstered at his ankle. Don't the word came out flat, final, and all three men froze. Samuel, there's a shotgun above the mantel. She hadn't known that 30 seconds ago, but somehow she was certain it was there. Samuel glanced at her with surprise, then moved to retrieve the weapon. His hands shook as he broke it open to check the shells, but his voice was steady when he spoke. It's loaded. The nervous biker, younger than the others, with prison tattoos covering his neck, slowly raised his hands. Look, lady, maybe we can work something out. This doesn't have to go sideways. It already went sideways the moment you threatened an innocent man. Victoria felt that cold calculation settling over her like armor. Now you're going to tell me exactly who sent you and what this formula is that's supposedly worth killing for. Graybeard spat blood and glared at her from the floor. You don't remember, do you? That's Rich, the great Viper, scourge of 3 states, taken down by her own score. Enlighten me. Dr. Marcus Chen, brilliant chemist, terrible gambler, owed the wrong people more money than he could make in 10 lifetimes. Graybeard's smile was nasty, so he developed something special for us, a compound that could erase specific memories while leaving everything else intact. Selective amnesia in a syringe. Victoria's stomach dropped. What are you saying? You stole the formula and the samples 3 days ago, walked right out of our lab like you owned the place. But before you could sell them to the highest bidder, you decided to test one on yourself." He laughed, the sound bitter and triumphant. "Ironic, isn't it? The thing you stole is what took your memory." Samuel's grip on the shotgun tightened. "You're lying." "Am I?" Gray Beard struggled to sit up, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Ask her about the injection site behind her left ear. Ask her why she can't remember the last 15 years, but somehow knew exactly how to take down 3 armed men." Victoria's hand moved involuntarily to touch the spot behind her ear. There was a small, tender bump there, something she'd assumed was from her collapse on the road. But now, with his words ringing in her head, it felt different, deliberate. "Why would I test it on myself?" "Because you're paranoid and you don't trust anyone." Classic Viper. Probably wanted to make sure the stuff worked before you tried to sell it to rival gangs. The nervous biker was gaining confidence, sensing her confusion. "But you screwed up the dosage, didn't you? Meant to erase a few hours, ended up wiping 15 years. The room spun slightly, and Victoria gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. If what they were saying was true, then her memory loss wasn't the result of an aneurysm. It was self-inflicted. And somewhere out there, hidden by her former self, was a formula that could rewrite someone's entire identity. "Where are the samples now?" Gray Beard pressed. "Our employer is getting impatient, and when he gets impatient, people start dying. Starting with your farmer friend." Samuel stepped closer to her, the shotgun still trained on their captives. "Victoria, whatever you did or didn't do, we'll figure it out. But right now, we need to decide what to do with our guests," Victoria finished, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Because one way or another, this ends today." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge thrown down before a duel. Victoria felt something crystallizing in her chest, not the cold calculation she'd feared, but a fierce clarity that cut through her confusion like a blade through silk. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying a weight that surprised even her. "This does end today." She turned to Samuel, noting the way his knuckles had gone white around the shotgun stock, the tight line of his jaw. 2 days ago, this man had been quietly tending his corn and nursing his grief. Now he stood ready to kill strangers in his own living room, and it was her fault. The thought should have crushed her. Instead, it sharpened her resolve to a razor's edge. "I need you to trust me," Victoria said, holding his gaze. "Can you do that?" Samuel's eyes searched her face, looking for what, she wasn't sure. The pre-med student who'd dreamed of healing people? The ruthless enforcer who'd apparently stolen experimental drugs? Some impossible fusion of both? Whatever he found there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Before she could answer, Gray Beard let out a harsh laugh. "How touching. The farmer thinks he's part of this story. But you and I both know how this plays out, Viper. You can pretend to be someone else all you want, but blood will tell." Victoria felt that strange doubling sensation again, part of her recoiling from his words, another part responding with predatory interest. The injection site behind her ear throbbed like a second heartbeat, and she found herself wondering what other memories lay buried beneath the chemical fog. What other skills, what other instincts that might prove useful in the next few minutes. "The formula," she said, crouching down until she was eye-level with the gray-bearded biker. "Tell me about Dr. Chen." "What's to tell? Brilliant man, weak character. Thought he could develop something revolutionary and keep clean hands. His smile was all malice. But when you're making weapons, princess, your hands get dirty whether you want them to or not." "Weapons?" Samuel's voice cracked slightly. "You said it erased memories." The nervous biker, still sprawled where Victoria had taken out his knees, let out a bitter chuckle. "What do you think selective memory loss is, farmer? Give it to a cop, erase everything he knows about your operation. Dose a rival gang member, make him forget where he hid his cash. Hell, use it on a witness, and suddenly their testimony becomes worthless." Victoria's stomach churned, but her voice remained steady. "And you think I was planning to sell this to other gangs?" "We don't think anything. We know." Graybeard's eyes glittered with something like triumph. Because we have the security footage of you walking out with our property. The only question is whether you were going into business for yourself or if someone else was pulling your strings. The implication hit her like a physical blow. If she'd stolen the formula, it meant she'd known exactly what it was capable of. Which meant that somewhere in the 15 years she couldn't remember, Victoria Martinez had become the kind of person who would weaponize amnesia for profit. "There's a third option you haven't considered," Victoria said quietly. "What's that?" "That I stole it to destroy it." The room fell silent, except for the tick of Samuel's grandmother's clock on the mantel. Victoria felt the truth of her words resonate somewhere deep in her chest. Not a memory exactly, but a bone-deep certainty that felt more real than anything else since she'd awakened in Samuel's spare bedroom. Graybeard's confident smirk faltered. "You're lying." "Am I? You said I tested it on myself. But what if that wasn't about checking the formula before selling it? What if I used it to erase my own knowledge of where I hid the samples?" Victoria stood slowly, feeling pieces click into place like tumblers in a lock. What if I made sure that even torture couldn't make me give up their location? The silence stretched taut as a wire, and Victoria could see the calculations running behind Graybeard's eyes. If she was right, if she'd deliberately erased her own memory to protect the formula's location, then they were back to square one. Worse than square one, because their only lead was standing in a farmhouse with a man willing to kill to protect her. "That's insane," the nervous biker said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? You said yourself that I was paranoid. Paranoid enough to test drugs on myself, apparently. Maybe paranoid enough to make sure that if I was captured, I couldn't betray whatever I was protecting." Samuel shifted beside her, and Victoria caught the slight nod he gave her. Not agreement with her theory, but acknowledgement of what she was doing. Creating doubt, buying time, changing the dynamic from hunter and prey to something more complex. "Even if you're right," Graybeard said slowly, "it doesn't matter. Our employer doesn't accept failure. If we can't bring him the formula, we'll bring him your corpse. Along with anyone who helped you." Victoria smiled and felt that wrongness again, the expression sitting unnaturally on her face. "Then we have a problem, because I'm not planning to die today." The words had barely left Victoria's lips when the youngest biker, the one with neck tattoos who'd been playing unconscious, exploded upward from the floor. His concealed knife glinted as it arced toward Samuel's ribs, and Victoria's world narrowed to that single point of silver death. She moved without thinking, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. Her body intercepted the blade's path, and she felt the steel bite deep into her forearm instead of Samuel's chest. Pain bloomed white-hot through her nervous system, but it felt distant, academic. What shocked her wasn't the wound, it was how naturally she'd calculated the exchange. Samuel's life for her blood, an acceptable trade that her body had made before her mind could interfere. The young biker's eyes widened in surprise, giving Victoria the opening she needed. Her uninjured hand shot forward, fingers finding the pressure point at the base of his neck with surgical precision. He crumpled immediately, knife clattering across the hardwood floor. "Jesus Christ," Samuel breathed, the shotgun wavering in his grip as he stared at Victoria's bleeding arm. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." The lie came automatically, though Victoria could feel warmth spreading down her forearm, droplets hitting the floor with soft ticks. "Keep the gun on them." Graybeard's expression had shifted from confident malice to something approaching respect. Now that's the Viper I remember. Cold as winter, calculating every angle. He struggled to sit up straighter. "But you're bleeding out, Princess, and we both know there's more where we came from." Victoria pressed her palm against the wound, stemming the flow. The pain was sharpening her focus, burning away the last vestiges of uncertainty that had plagued her since awakening. This was life or death now. No more time for philosophy or gentle self-discovery. "How many more?" she asked. "Enough." But something in Graybeard's voice suggested he was less certain than he wanted to appear. "Our employer has resources you can't imagine. People in law enforcement, government contracts, connections that reach—" "I didn't ask about your employer. I asked how many more bikers are coming for us tonight." The nervous one by the window had been trying to inch toward the front door, but he froze when Victoria's gaze fixed on him. Her attention felt different now, predatory and absolute. Not the careful consideration of someone trying to solve a puzzle, but the focused intensity of an apex predator selecting her next target. "Two more," he stammered. "Maybe three. They're supposed to check in every hour." Victoria glanced at Samuel's grandmother clock. 11:47. When was their last check-in? 11:30. 13 minutes. Not enough time to run, even if Samuel would abandon his farm, and running would only delay the inevitable. These people knew where to find them now, knew that Samuel had seen their faces and heard their plans. They'd never stop coming. Unless she gave them a reason to. "Samuel," Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I need you to tie them up. Kitchen twine, electrical cord, whatever you have. Make sure it's tight. Victoria, you're losing blood. We need to get you to a hospital. We need to end this." She met his eyes, seeing her own desperation reflected there. "They're not going to stop. Even if we run, they'll follow. Even if we call the police, they have connections. The only way this ends is if I remember where I hid that formula. But you said yourself that you might have erased those memories permanently." Victoria felt something cold and familiar settling into her bones, not the warmth she'd found in Samuel's kitchen, but the calculating ruthlessness that had kept Viper alive in a world of violence and betrayal. "Then I'll have to make new memories, better ones." She turned back to Graybeard, who was watching their exchange with the patient interest of a snake studying field mice. "Your employer, what's his timeline?" "Impatient, like I said. We were supposed to have you back by midnight. And if you don't make contact?" Graybeard's smile was all teeth. "Then tomorrow gets very interesting for everyone in a 50-mile radius, starting with every farm between here and the county line." The threat hit Samuel like a physical blow. Victoria could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, the sudden understanding that this wouldn't end with them. These people would tear through rural Nebraska like a plague, destroying innocent lives in their search for answers Victoria might not even possess. No, the word came out harder than steel. That's not happening. Victoria wiped blood from her palm and walked to the window, peering through the curtains at the dark farmland beyond. Somewhere out there, in a location she'd chosen and then deliberately forgotten, lay the power to rewrite human memory itself. She'd stolen it for reasons she couldn't remember, hidden it with paranoia that had cost her 15 years of life, and now innocent people would die unless she could somehow excavate the truth from her own chemically altered mind. The ordeal had begun, and Victoria realized with crystalline clarity that before this night was over she would have to become everything she'd feared she already was. The distant rumble of motorcycle engines cut through the night air like a death knell. Victoria's blood ran cold as the sound grew louder, more distinct. Not the lone rider she'd hoped for, but multiple bikes approaching fast down the gravel road. 3 bikes, Graybeard said with smug satisfaction. "Right on schedule." Victoria's mind raced through their options, each one worse than the last. The farmhouse was defensible but not fortress material. Samuel knew the land, but they'd be outnumbered and outgunned the moment they stepped outside. And her arm was still bleeding despite the makeshift bandage Samuel had torn from his shirt. "How long until they reach the house?" Samuel asked, checking the shotgun's load for the 3rd time. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Victoria moved away from the window, her strategic mind cataloging everything that could go wrong. "They'll surround the building first, cut off escape routes. Then they'll try to negotiate from a position of strength." Negotiate for what? The question hung in the air as headlights swept across the farmhouse windows. Victoria felt that familiar doubling sensation, part of her terrified and overwhelmed, another part slipping into combat mode with frightening ease. The injection site behind her ear throbbed, and she wondered what other tactical knowledge lay buried in her chemically altered brain. "They want me alive," she said quietly. "The formula's useless if I'm dead and can't remember where I hid it." Graybeard's laugh was harsh. "Don't be so sure about that, Princess. Our employer's got other ways of extracting information from corpses." Before Victoria could process that terrifying implication, the sound of engines cut off abruptly. Car doors slammed in the darkness beyond the farmhouse, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Professional movements, coordinated and efficient. Samuel positioned himself behind the couch, shotgun trained on the front door. "What's the play?" Victoria opened her mouth to answer, but froze as a new voice called out from the darkness, one that sent ice through her veins despite carrying no specific memory. "Victoria, I know you're in there. We need to talk." The voice was cultured, educated, with the kind of quiet authority that came from never having to raise it to be obeyed. Not another biker or street enforcer, someone much more dangerous. Dr. Chen, gray beard, breathed, and Victoria saw genuine fear flicker across his face for the first time. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The mysterious employer wasn't some crime boss or rival gang leader. It was the chemist himself, the man who'd created the memory-altering compound that had stolen 15 years of her life. "This changes things," Victoria whispered, feeling the last of her half-formed escape plans crumble to dust. Chen's voice carried easily through the farmhouse walls. "I'm not here to hurt you, Victoria. I'm here to offer you something precious, your memories back. All of them." Samuel's grip on the shotgun tightened. "He's lying." "Is he?" Victoria found herself desperately wanting to believe it was possible, even as her tactical mind screamed warnings. "If he created the compound that took my memories, maybe he has a way to reverse it." "Victoria Cross," Chen continued, his tone patient as a teacher addressing a struggling student. "Daughter of Maria Martinez, lost to cancer when you were 17. You became a pre-med student to honor her memory, dreamed of healing people the way no one could heal her." Victoria's knees nearly buckled. Those weren't facts someone could have researched. They were intimate details from the life she remembered, the life before everything went dark. "But then your boyfriend, David Kellerman, stole your research and published it under his own name. Destroyed your academic career and broke your heart in the same week. That's when you dropped out, isn't it? When Victoria Martinez died and something harder was born." "Stop." The word came out strangled, raw. Victoria could feel memories trying to surface, not the lost 15 years, but the painful transition between who she'd been and who she'd become. The moment her faith in goodness had shattered beyond repair. "I can give you everything back, Victoria. Not just the memories you've lost, but the peace you threw away. The person you were before the world taught you to be cruel." Samuel moved to her side, his presence anchoring her as the foundations of her carefully constructed new identity began to shake. "Whatever he's offering, it comes with a price. These people always want something in return." Chen's next words confirmed Samuel's suspicions with brutal clarity. "All I ask in return is the location of my stolen property, and your friend's life as collateral for your cooperation." The farmhouse door exploded inward, and Victoria's world dissolved into chaos and gunfire. As she threw herself toward Samuel, one terrible truth crystallized in her mind: she'd been wrong about everything. Chen hadn't come to negotiate. He'd come to take what he wanted from her corpse. And now the man she'd grown to love was about to die for her forgotten sins. Time slowed to crystalline clarity as the farmhouse door splintered inward. Victoria's body moved with lethal precision she didn't remember learning, tackling Samuel behind the heavy oak dining table as automatic gunfire chewed through the air where they'd been standing. Splinters exploded around them, and she felt the familiar weight of violence settling over her like a second skin. But in that moment of pure survival instinct, something else crashed through the chemical barriers in her mind. Not the lost 15 years, but the truth about what she'd stolen and why. The children. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Jesus Christ, the children. "Samuel, stay down." She pressed him against the floor as bullets shredded the farmhouse walls, her tactical awareness mapping the attackers' positions by sound alone. 3 shooters at the front entrance, 2 more circling toward the back door. Professional formation, military precision. Graybeard and his companions had gone silent, either dead or playing dead, smart enough to know that Chen's people wouldn't distinguish between allies and obstacles once the shooting started. "Victoria!" Chen's voice carried over the gunfire, still impossibly calm. This ends when you give me what I need. Every second you delay costs more innocent lives. The memory fragment expanded, bringing with it a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her head injury. She'd seen Chen's research notes, his test subjects, his plans for mass distribution, not to gangs or criminals, but to governments, military applications, the ability to selectively erase trauma from soldiers, delete classified knowledge from captured operatives, or, most horrifically, experiment on unwilling subjects without leaving psychological evidence. But it was the clinical trial data that had pushed her over the edge. Dozens of children in state care, used as test subjects because no one would miss them if the experiments went wrong. Chen had called it therapeutic intervention for traumatized youth. The reality was systematic psychological torture conducted under the guise of healing. "I remember," she whispered, the truth cutting through her like broken glass. "I remember why I took it." Samuel's eyes found hers in the chaos, and she saw understanding dawn in his face. Not the why of her theft, but something deeper. The recognition that whatever she'd done, whatever she'd become, she'd chosen to sacrifice everything to protect the vulnerable. The gunfire stopped abruptly, leaving only the ringing silence of spent ammunition and settling debris. Victoria could hear boots moving with deliberate care across the farmhouse threshold, professional soldiers clearing a structure. "The formula has already been replicated," Chen called out. "What you stole were the only complete samples. Without them, I can't verify the compound's stability for mass production. You've delayed me, not stopped me." Victoria felt her world tilt on its axis. If Chen was telling the truth, then her sacrifice had bought time, not victory. Somewhere out there, he was still conducting his experiments, still refining his techniques, still preparing to unleash selective amnesia as a weapon of control. "But here's what you don't know," Chen continued, his voice closer now. "The compound you injected yourself with, it wasn't just memory suppression. It was the newest iteration, designed to be reversible under specific chemical triggers. I can give you back everything you've lost, Victoria. Every memory, every skill, every relationship from those missing 15 years. Samuel's hand found hers, anchoring her as the implications crashed through her consciousness. 15 years of relationships, of choices, of becoming someone else entirely. The woman who'd loved and lost, who'd fought and survived, who'd ultimately chosen to erase herself rather than let innocent children suffer. And in return, Chen's voice was right outside the dining room. "You'll remember exactly where you hid the original samples. Because I know you, Victoria. I know how your mind works. Even drugged, even desperate, you would have chosen a location that meant something to the person you used to be." The revelation hit her like lightning. He was right. Wherever she'd hidden the formula, it wouldn't have been random. Some part of her, the part that remembered being Victoria Martinez, the pre-med student who dreamed of healing, would have influenced the choice. A location connected to her mother, to her lost innocence, to the person she'd been before David Kellerman's betrayal had hardened her into someone capable of infiltrating criminal organizations and stealing classified research. "Samuel," she breathed, pieces falling into place with terrifying clarity. "The cemetery. My mother's grave. That's where I would have hidden it." She could see the truth of it in his eyes, the recognition that her broken psyche would have chosen her mother's resting place as the vault for the most dangerous secret she'd ever carried. The woman who'd inspired Victoria's dream of healing, now guarding the formula that could either save or damn countless innocent minds. A shadow fell across the dining room entrance, and Victoria looked up to see Dr. Chen himself. Not the monster she'd imagined, but a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes that made his actions infinitely more terrifying. "Hello, Victoria," he said gently. "It's time to come home." Victoria's mind went perfectly still, like the eye of a hurricane. The terrified woman who'd awakened in Samuel's farmhouse was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. She could feel the transformation happening in real time, not the return of her memories, but the emergence of instincts that 15 years of violence had burned into her very bones. "Samuel," she said quietly, never taking her eyes off Chen. When I move, you run for the back door. I'm not leaving you. You are. Her voice carried absolute authority now, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. Because if they kill you, I have nothing left to fight for. Chen stepped fully into the dining room, flanked by two men in tactical gear. Professional soldiers, not bikers. Victoria catalogued their positions, their weapons, the micro-expressions that would telegraph their next moves. Knowledge she shouldn't possess, but wielded like a scalpel. There's no need for dramatics, Victoria. We both want the same thing, to end this standoff without further bloodshed. Chen's smile was grandfatherly, sincere. I've brought the reversal compound. One injection and you'll remember everything, the location of my research, yes, but also 15 years of your own life. Relationships, accomplishments, the woman you became after Victoria Martinez. The woman who learned to live with what you made her steal. Victoria shifted her weight imperceptibly, calculating angles and distances. Tell me, doctor, how many more children have you experimented on since I took your samples? Something flickered behind Chen's kind eyes. My research helps traumatize children. Selective memory modification can eliminate PTSD, abuse trauma, psychological damage that would otherwise destroy young lives. By erasing the children themselves, their personalities, their histories, their ability to testify against the people who hurt them. Victoria felt her mother's silver cross pressing against her chest, the only constant between all her fractured identities. Very convenient. Samuel's breathing had changed beside her. Not panic, but the controlled fear of a man preparing for action. He trusted her now, trusted the lethal competence that was bleeding through her amnesia like water through a cracked dam. I've read your files, Victoria. Chen's voice remained patient, therapeutic. The things that were done to you after you infiltrated my organization. The betrayals, the violence, the gradual erosion of everything good you'd once believed about the world. Don't you want to remember who loved you? Who stood by you? The family you chose when your blood family was gone? The words hit harder than Victoria expected. 15 years of relationships, erased as completely as if they'd never existed. Friends who thought she was dead. Lovers who'd been abandoned without explanation. A chosen family that had watched her inject herself with an experimental compound and disappear into chemical oblivion. What makes you think, she said carefully, that remembering will make me more likely to help you? Because the woman you became understood necessary sacrifices. She knew that progress requires difficult choices, that the greater good sometimes demands individual suffering. Chen gestured to his soldiers who relaxed their stances slightly. Victoria Cross wasn't a hero, Victoria. She was a pragmatist, someone who understood that saving hundreds requires sacrificing dozens. No. Samuel's voice cut through the manipulation like a blade. I don't know who she was for 15 years, but I know who she is now. And the woman lying next to me in this farmhouse would die before she'd let you hurt another child. Victoria felt something break open in her chest, not memory, but recognition. Samuel saw her clearly, perhaps more clearly than she saw herself. Not the pre-med student she remembered being, not the hardened operative she'd apparently become, but the person emerging from the intersection of innocence and experience. The cemetery. Chen leaned forward slightly. Your mother's grave in Riverside Memorial. Section C, plot 247. That's where you hid the samples, isn't it? The accuracy of the information sent ice through Victoria's veins. He knew too much, had researched too thoroughly. But it also revealed something crucial. He needed her confirmation because he wasn't certain. Even with all his resources, he couldn't be sure where Victoria Cross had chosen to bury the most dangerous secret in the world. Here's my counteroffer, Victoria said, her voice steady as stone. You and your people leave, now. You stop experimenting on children, you destroy your research, and you disappear. In exchange, the formula stays buried forever. Chen's laugh was genuinely amused. My dear child, you have no leverage. We know where the samples are hidden. We simply need you to confirm the exact location and any security measures you may have implemented. Do you? Victoria smiled, and Samuel felt a chill at how predatory the expression was. Because I think you're bluffing. I think you've torn apart that cemetery looking for something you're not even sure is there, and now you're running out of time before your backers lose patience with your failures." The slight tightening around Chen's eyes confirmed her guess. Victoria pressed her advantage. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, rising slowly to her feet. "You're going to walk away, and I'm going to make sure that formula never sees daylight again, even if I have to burn down half of Nebraska to do it." Chen's expression shifted, the grandfatherly mask slipping to reveal something far more calculating beneath. "You're forcing my hand, Victoria. I had hoped to resolve this civilly." Victoria felt the air in the room change, the subtle shift that preceded violence. Chen's soldiers tensed, their weapons rising fractionally, but she was already moving, muscle memory overriding conscious thought as she threw herself toward the nearest tactical vest, her fingers finding the combat knife strapped to his belt. The blade slid between his ribs with practiced precision, and Victoria realized with crystal clarity that she'd done this before, many times. The knowledge should have horrified her, but instead, it felt like coming home. Samuel was moving too, following her earlier instruction despite his obvious reluctance to abandon her. But Chen's second soldier tracked him with mechanical precision, rifle sight finding center mass. Chen's voice cut through the chaos, halting his remaining operative mid-trigger pull. Victoria's stolen knife pressed against his throat, drawing a thin line of blood. "Let the farmer go. Not happening." Victoria's voice was granite. "He stays with me." "Then we're at an impasse." Chen seemed remarkably calm for a man with a blade at his jugular. "Though I suspect you've just remembered something important about yourself." He was right. The fluid violence, the tactical thinking, the absolute certainty in her movements. Pieces of Victoria Cross were bleeding through the chemical barriers whether she wanted them to or not. But rather than the monster she'd feared becoming, she felt focused, protective, deadly when necessary but with purpose beyond mere destruction. "The samples aren't at my mother's grave," she said quietly. "That was misdirection for anyone who might come looking. But you're right about one thing. I chose somewhere that meant something to Victoria Martinez." Chen's pulse jumped against the knife edge. "Where?" "The pediatric wing of St. Mary's Hospital, where I used to volunteer as a pre-med student reading to sick children." Victoria smiled grimly. "Hidden where only someone who remembered my mother's favorite bedtime story would think to look." The truth of it felt right in ways that had nothing to do with recovered memory. Her unconscious mind had chosen the perfect hiding place, somewhere that honored her original dream of healing while ensuring the formula would remain close to the children it was designed to harm. "You're lying." But Chen's voice carried less certainty now. "Am I? Your people have been tearing apart a cemetery for weeks, haven't they? Finding nothing because Victoria Cross was smarter than you gave her credit for." She pressed the blade deeper, feeling his swallow against the steel. "She knew you'd eventually figure out her real identity, knew you'd research her background, her family, her connections, so she hid the most dangerous secret in the world in the last place you'd look, surrounded by the very children you want to experiment on." Samuel had positioned himself behind the remaining soldier, close enough to act if the situation deteriorated further. Victoria could see the question in his eyes. "What's the plan?" "Here's what's going to happen," Victoria continued, her tactical mind spinning possibilities with frightening efficiency. "Your people are going to withdraw. You're going to destroy your research, dismantle your operation, and disappear. Because if I see so much as a whisper of your work surfacing again, I'll make sure every law enforcement agency in the world knows exactly what you've been doing to children. You have no proof, no evidence, just the ravings of an amnesiac with a criminal past." Victoria's smile turned sharp as broken glass. "I have your samples, and I have you confessing to human experimentation on a dozen recording devices I planted around this farmhouse while you were monologuing." Chen's face went pale, impossible. "We swept for surveillance equipment. You swept for electronic devices, not old-fashioned analog recording equipment hidden in furniture by someone who spent 15 years learning to be paranoid." The lie rolled off her tongue with such conviction that Victoria almost believed it herself. "The question is, do you want to take that gamble?" The standoff stretched taut as piano wire. Three people balanced on the knife's edge of violence. Victoria could feel Chen calculating odds, weighing risks, trying to determine if she was bluffing. Then Samuel spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority. "She's not the same woman who stole from you, Doctor. But she's also not the innocent girl you think you can manipulate. She's something new, something you didn't account for." Victoria felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. Not Victoria Martinez, not Victoria Cross. Someone forged from both identities, carrying the idealism of one and the hard-won wisdom of the other. "Choose," she said to Chen, applying just enough pressure to make her point. "Walk away and live with the knowledge that you failed, or force my hand and discover exactly what 15 years of violence taught me about protecting the people I love." In the silence that followed, Victoria could hear her own heartbeat, steady and sure. She'd committed now, fully and completely. Whatever came next would require her to become exactly what Samuel believed her to be, not a monster or a saint, but a guardian standing between the vulnerable and those who would prey on them. The final confrontation was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Chen's eyes narrowed as he processed her ultimatum, and Victoria felt the moment balance on a razor's edge. The silence stretched between them like a held breath, pregnant with possibilities that could explode into violence or dissolve into retreat. Then Chen smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made Victoria's blood freeze. "You're very good," he said softly, "but you've made one critical error in your reasoning." The words sent ice through Victoria's veins even as she maintained pressure on the blade. Something in his tone suggested she'd missed a crucial piece of the puzzle. "I don't need the original samples to continue my work," Chen continued, his voice steady despite the knife at his throat. "What I need is you. Specifically, your brain. You see, Victoria, you weren't just a thief who stole my research. You were my most successful test subject." The farmhouse seemed to tilt around her as the implications crashed home. "What are you talking about?" "The compound you injected yourself with wasn't stolen from my laboratory. It was administered to you there, 3 years ago, after we captured you infiltrating our facility." Chen's smile widened. "Everything you think you remember about that night, the break-in, the theft, the desperate injection, those are false memories implanted during your initial treatment." Samuel's sharp intake of breath cut through the air like a gunshot. Victoria felt reality reshaping itself around her. 15 years of assumed history crumbling into dust. "You've been my patient all along," Chen said gently. "Living in a carefully constructed delusion, believing yourself to be a criminal when you're actually the proof of concept for selective memory replacement. The most sophisticated psychological reconstruction ever achieved." Victoria's hand trembled against the knife handle, her entire sense of self fracturing. If Chen was telling the truth, then nothing she believed about her recent past was real. Not the theft, not her sacrifice for the children, not even her reasons for being here. "The woman who calls herself Victoria Cross never existed," Chen pressed. "She was a cover identity we created to explain your absence while you underwent treatment. The real Victoria Martinez, the pre-med student, the idealist, the woman who dreamed of healing, that's who you've always been. The violence, the criminal associations, the years of hardening yourself into a weapon. All carefully implanted fiction. You're lying." But Victoria's voice lacked conviction. Too many pieces suddenly fit together with terrifying clarity. Her fragmentary memories, her instinctive combat skills that felt both foreign and familiar. The way certain knowledge seemed to surface from nowhere. "The Hell Angels Motorcycle Club has no record of a Victoria Cross," Chen continued relentlessly. "The underground contacts who supposedly helped you infiltrate my organization don't exist. Even the cemetery plot where you claim to have hidden my samples, it belongs to a Maria Santos, not Maria Martinez. Your mother's name, but not her grave." The knife felt impossibly heavy in Victoria's hand as her constructed reality collapsed. Every certainty she'd built about her identity, every assumption about her past, revealed as elaborate psychological architecture designed to contain and control her. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Because you volunteered," Chen said, his voice taking on the gentle tone of a therapist delivering difficult news. Victoria Martinez came to my research facility 3 years ago, seeking experimental treatment for severe PTSD following your mother's death and your subsequent trauma at the hands of David Kellerman. You begged us to help you forget the pain. Samuel moved closer, his presence the only solid anchor in Victoria's disintegrating world. Even if that's true, he said fiercely, it doesn't give you the right to keep experimenting on her. But that's just it, Chen replied. The experiment was complete. Victoria had been successfully treated, her traumatic memories replaced with a functional narrative that allowed her to rebuild her life. The plan was to gradually integrate her back into society with a clean psychological slate. Victoria felt the terrible logic of his words settling into her consciousness like poison. Then, why am I here? Why the chase, the violence, the desperate flight? Because you started remembering things you weren't supposed to remember. Fragments of your time in our facility, pieces of the treatment process that should have been completely suppressed. Chen's expression showed what might have been genuine concern. Your psychological framework began destabilizing 6 months ago. The Victoria Cross persona started asserting independence, creating memories of rebellion and theft to explain the growing inconsistencies in your implanted history. The farmhouse spun around her as Victoria grappled with the possibility that her entire sense of agency was an illusion. Every choice she thought she'd made, every stand she'd taken, every moment of defiance against Chen's organization, all potentially the product of a fragmenting psyche trying to reconcile incompatible narratives. The aneurysm that brought you here wasn't random, Chen said softly. It was your brain's response to irreconcilable psychological pressure. The constructed memories fighting against your true history, creating neurological stress that finally manifested as physical collapse. Victoria looked at Samuel, seeing her terror reflected in his eyes. If Chen was telling the truth, then nothing she believed about herself could be trusted. She was trapped in a maze of manufactured identity with no way to distinguish reality from carefully crafted fiction. But as she met Samuel's gaze, one truth crystallized with perfect clarity. Whatever she had been, whatever had been done to her, the woman she was becoming in this moment, the guardian standing between innocence and predation, that person was real. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice growing stronger. Real memories or false ones. I know who I choose to be right now. Chen's expression hardened at her declaration, the last pretense of concern evaporating. Choice is an illusion when your entire psychological framework is artificial, Victoria. You can't choose to be someone when you don't know who you actually are. Watch me, Victoria said, and drove the knife deeper. Chen gasped, but his hand moved with surprising speed to a device at his belt. The sharp whistle of an ultrasonic signal pierced the air, and Victoria felt something shift in her skull, a disorienting pressure that made her vision blur and her grip on the knife falter. Neural disruptor, Chen wheezed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Designed specifically for your implant frequencies. Did you think we wouldn't prepare contingencies? Victoria staggered backward as waves of artificial confusion crashed through her mind. The device was attacking the barriers between her constructed memories and whatever lay beneath, turning her own psychology into a weapon against her. Images flashed chaotically, a laboratory, restraints, needles, her own voice begging for the pain to stop. But through the chaos, Samuel was moving. The farmer crashed into Chen's remaining soldier with the full weight of desperate protection, driving the man into the kitchen wall with enough force to crack plaster. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as they went down in a tangle of limbs. Victoria! Samuel's voice cut through the neural static like a lifeline. Whatever's in your head, fight it. You're stronger than their programming. Chen was struggling to his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, while the other reached for something in his jacket. Victoria forced herself to move through the disorientation, muscle memory overriding conscious thought, as she tackled him back to the ground. They rolled across the farmhouse floor in a deadly embrace, Chen's clinical detachment replaced by animal desperation. His fingers found her throat while she fought to maintain pressure on his knife wound. Around them, Samuel grappled with the soldier, the sound of breaking furniture mixing with labored breathing and muffled impacts. You could have been free, Chen gasped, his grip tightening. Clean slate. No trauma, no pain, no impossible burden of trying to save a world that doesn't want saving. Victoria's vision darkened at the edges, but his words sparked something deeper than memory, and fundamental understanding of who she'd always been, beneath every layer of identity and trauma and artificial construction. Maybe, she managed, her own hands finding his wrists, but freedom isn't worth the price of forgetting why people need protecting. She broke his hold with a move that felt like breathing, driving her elbow into his solar plexus with precise force. Chen doubled over, and Victoria rolled away, gasping air back into her lungs. Across the room, Samuel had gained the upper hand through sheer determination and protective fury. The soldier lay unconscious, his weapon kicked safely away, but Chen was already reaching for his neural disruptor again, finger hovering over controls that could scramble Victoria's mind beyond recovery. One more pulse and your psychological integration becomes impossible, he warned, blood staining his lips. You'll spend the rest of your life unable to distinguish memory from fiction, reality from implanted narrative. Is your defiance worth permanent madness? Victoria felt the weight of the choice settling on her shoulders. She could surrender, accept Chen's version of freedom through forgetting, let herself be rebuilt into someone safe and manageable, or she could stand her ground and risk losing her sanity in the process. The answer came without hesitation. Some things are worth any price, she said, and lunged for the device. Chen triggered the disruptor as her fingers closed on his wrist, and Victoria's world exploded into chaos. Every artificial barrier in her mind shattered simultaneously, 15 years of suppressed memories crashing together with devastating force. She saw herself volunteering for experimental treatment, begging for relief from trauma that made living unbearable. But she also saw the gradual corruption of that treatment, the way her desire to heal had been twisted into a tool for control. And underneath it all, blazing like a beacon through every layer of psychological manipulation, she found the truth that no amount of programming could erase. Victoria Martinez had become Victoria Cross, not through artificial construction, but through conscious choice. The woman who'd walked into Chen's facility 3 years ago had known exactly what she was risking, had deliberately chosen to forget her pain so she could better fight for others who couldn't fight for themselves. The memories weren't implanted, they were recovered. Every moment of violence, every hard decision, every sacrifice made in service of protecting the innocent. All real, all chosen, all hers. Victoria's consciousness reassembled itself around that central truth like crystal forming around a seed. When the chaos finally cleared, she found herself holding Chen's shattered neural disruptor, the man himself unconscious at her feet. Samuel knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you—" "I remember," Victoria said simply, and for the first time since waking up in his farmhouse she knew exactly who she was. The confrontation was over. But the real battle, the choice of who to become moving forward, was just beginning. Victoria stared down at Chen's unconscious form, the shattered neural disruptor cutting into her palm. The weight of recovered memories pressed against her consciousness like a physical force. 15 years of choices, sacrifices, and carefully constructed identity now laid bare in all their brutal clarity. She was both women, had always been both women. Victoria Martinez, the idealistic pre-med student who'd volunteered for experimental treatment to escape unbearable trauma, and Victoria Cross, the weapon she'd consciously forged herself into, trading innocence for the ability to protect others from the predators who stalked the vulnerable. But now, looking at Samuel's worried face and feeling the warmth of his farmhouse around her, she faced a choice that would define everything moving forward. "Victoria," Samuel's voice carried gentle concern. "What did you remember?" "Everything." She let the broken device fall from her fingers, blood from the cuts mixing with Chen's on the floor. "I remember choosing to forget. I remember volunteering to become someone harder, someone capable of violence when violence was necessary. And I remember why." Through the farmhouse windows, she could see Chen's backup teams positioned in the cornfields waiting for orders that would never come. Their leader was unconscious, his primary weapon destroyed, but they would regroup eventually. This victory was temporary. "The children," Victoria said, the words heavy with understanding. "The ones Chen wants to experiment on. They're not just random test subjects, they're kids like I was, broken by trauma, desperate for relief, willing to trade anything for the promise of peace." Samuel helped her to her feet, his touch grounding her in the present moment. "And you've been protecting them all this time." "Trying to." Victoria moved to the window, studying the tactical positions in the failing light. But protection requires presence. It demands constant vigilance, endless choices between lesser evils. The woman who could do that, Victoria Cross, she can't exist in your world, Samuel. The truth settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Victoria felt the ripples of implications spreading outward, touching every hope they'd built together over these precious days of healing. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Victoria turned to face him, memorizing the angles of his face in the farmhouse lamplight. "I have to. Chen's organization is just one tentacle of something much larger. There are children in facilities across 3 countries who need someone willing to do terrible things in service of protecting them. And that someone has to be you?" "Yes." The word came out steady, despite the way it shattered her heart. "Because I remember now why I chose to become her in the first place. The world has monsters, Samuel. Real ones who prey on broken children. Someone has to stand between them and their victims." Samuel stepped closer, his hands finding her shoulders. "What about us? What about the life we could build here?" Victoria reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "You gave me something I thought was impossible, the memory of what it feels like to be safe, to be loved, to imagine a future without violence." Her voice caught. "But that safety comes at a price. If I stay, if I choose this quiet life, children die. They disappear into facilities like Chen's, broken down and rebuilt into weapons or victims. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Victoria stepped back, already feeling the familiar weight of purpose settling onto her shoulders like armor. Victoria Martinez could stay here, could choose love over duty, could build a family and tend a garden and pretend the darkness doesn't exist. But she would know, every morning when she woke up in your arms, that her happiness was purchased with other people's suffering. Samuel's face crumpled with understanding and grief. "So you're choosing to be Victoria Cross." "I'm choosing to be both." Victoria moved through the farmhouse, collecting the few possessions that mattered: Chen's research notes, the soldiers' communication equipment, intelligence that would help her track down the next facility, the next group of children who needed protection. "The part of me that loves you, that believes in healing and hope and second chances, she'll carry that forward. She'll remember why the fight matters. And the part that loves me stays here?" Victoria paused in her preparations, her hands stilling on the tactical gear. "No, that part comes with me, because you taught me something Chen's programming never could, that violence in service of protection isn't the same as violence for its own sake, that the capacity for love doesn't make someone weak, it makes them worth protecting." She turned to face him one final time, seeing her own grief reflected in his eyes. "I'll come back, Samuel. When the children are safe, when the facilities are destroyed, when there's no one left who needs Victoria Cross to stand guard, I'll come back to this farmhouse and the man who showed me I could be more than just a weapon. Promise?" Victoria crossed to him, rising on her toes to press her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of tears and goodbye and unbreakable vows. "I promise." Victoria Martinez promises, and she's never broken her word. Outside, engines started in the darkness. Chen's people were withdrawing, but Victoria knew they would regroup elsewhere. New facilities, new victims, new horrors that required someone willing to pay any price to stop them. The sacrifice was complete. She was choosing duty over love, violence over peace, the endless burden of protection over the simple joy of healing. But as she gathered her weapons and prepared to disappear back into the darkness, Victoria carried with her something she'd never possessed before, the absolute certainty that someone worth saving was waiting for her to come home. The cost of victory was everything. The reward was hope itself. The farmhouse fell silent, except for the distant rumble of retreating vehicles, and Chen's labored breathing. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, her tactical gear half-assembled, watching the red taillights of Chen's convoy disappear into the Nebraska darkness. The finality of her decision hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel remained by the kitchen window, his silhouette outlined against the pale curtains. Neither of them moved to break the spell of this last moment together. Victoria could feel the weight of recovered memories settling into permanent grooves in her consciousness. 15 years of carefully constructed identity, now integrated into something both familiar and strange. "They're gone," Samuel said quietly, not turning around. "For now." Victoria set down the communication equipment she'd been gathering, her hands suddenly reluctant to continue preparations for departure. "They'll regroup within 48 hours. Chen's unconscious, not dead. Someone else will take command of the operation, and you'll be waiting for them." It wasn't a question, but Victoria nodded anyway. The certainty of purpose that had driven her for so long felt different now, tempered by the knowledge of what she was choosing to leave behind, strengthened by understanding why that sacrifice mattered. Chen stirred on the farmhouse floor, consciousness returning in gradual stages. Victoria moved to secure his hands with zip ties from his own tactical vest, her movements automatic despite the emotional chaos beneath. When his eyes finally focused on her face, she saw resignation rather than defiance. "You remember everything now," he said, voice thick with pain and pharmaceutical residue. "Everything." Victoria checked his restraints, ensuring he was immobilized but not in immediate medical danger, including why you were wrong about choice being an illusion. "Every decision I made, becoming Victoria Cross, accepting the memory suppression, walking into your facility 3 years ago, all of it was conscious choice." Chen's laugh was bitter. "Choice made from trauma, from pain so severe you begged us to make you forget your own mother's death." "Yes." Victoria felt Samuel's presence behind her, a steadying warmth that gave her strength to face this final confrontation with her past, and choosing to transform that trauma into something useful instead of letting it destroy me. "That's what you never understood about your research. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about integration." She stood, moving back to Samuel's side. Through the window, she could see the corn swaying in the night breeze, peaceful and eternal. Tomorrow, the harvest would continue. Life would persist in its quiet rhythms while she disappeared back into the darkness to fight battles most people would never know existed. "The local sheriff will be here within the hour," Samuel said, his voice carefully controlled. "I called them while you were remembering. Chen and his soldier will be processed through official channels." Victoria nodded, understanding the gift he was offering. "That buys me time to track down the facilities before they can relocate the children." "How many?" Chen's files show 17 active sites across North America. Conservative estimate puts the total number of subjects at over 300. The numbers felt like physical weight settling on her shoulders, most of them kids between 12 and 16. All of them broken by trauma, all of them desperate enough to volunteer for experimental treatment. Samuel turned to face her finally, and Victoria saw her own grief reflected in his eyes. "You can't save them all." "No," she agreed. "But I can save some, and maybe that's enough to tip the balance." They stood looking at each other across the kitchen that had become the center of Victoria's brief experience of peace. Every detail was already burning itself into permanent memory. The way lamplight caught the silver in Samuel's hair, the familiar scent of coffee and cornbread, the feeling of being known and accepted completely. "When you come back," Samuel said slowly, "what if you can't find your way to being Victoria Martinez again? What if the woman who walks through that door is only Victoria Cross?" The question hung between them, carrying the weight of every fear Victoria had about her own nature. She'd seen what violence could do to a person's soul, how the choices required for protection could slowly erode everything soft and hopeful. "Then you'll remind me," she said simply. "The same way you reminded me these past few days that I was more than just a weapon. Love doesn't disappear because someone temporarily forgets how to access it." Victoria moved through the farmhouse one last time, her footsteps echoing in rooms that had briefly felt like home. In the bedroom where she'd recovered from her collapse, she found Samuel's spare jacket draped over the chair where she'd left it. Without hesitation, she pulled it on over her tactical gear, a tangible connection to carry forward into whatever darkness waited. "I'll send word when each facility is neutralized," she promised, gathering Chen's research files. "You'll know I'm still alive, still fighting." "I'll know," Samuel said. "And I'll be here when you're ready to stop." Victoria kissed him one final time, pouring everything unsaid into the contact. Gratitude, love, and unshakable determination to earn her way back to this moment of perfect understanding. Then she stepped into the Nebraska night, disappearing into shadows that welcomed her like an old friend. Behind her, the farmhouse lights stayed on, a beacon marking home. The first facility fell in Detroit on a rainy Thursday morning in late September. Victoria moved through the abandoned warehouse like smoke made lethal, her approach so silent that the guards never knew death was coming. But when she found the children, 17 of them, ages 12 to 15, huddled in reinforced cells with neural monitoring equipment attached to their skulls, something fundamental had changed in how she operated. The old Victoria Cross would have executed the researchers without question, efficiently and brutally. This version paused at each door, ensuring the children saw her face clearly before she spoke. "My name is Victoria," she said to a 13-year-old girl, whose eyes held the same hollow desperation Victoria remembered from her own reflection years ago. "You're safe now. You're going home." She still killed the researchers, but she made certain the children were evacuated first, delivered safely to FBI custody with full documentation of their treatment. The violence remained necessary. These people would simply relocate and continue their work if merely arrested. But now that violence served a higher purpose than efficient elimination. Samuel's jacket became her talisman, worn beneath tactical gear across 3 countries and 11 more facilities. When exhaustion threatened to consume her, when the endless cycle of violence and rescue began to feel meaningless, she would touch the worn fabric and remember the feeling of safety, of being known completely. She sent postcards, brief, coded messages that confirmed her continued existence without revealing operational details. "Corn looks good this year from Philadelphia. Weather's been stormy but clearing from Toronto. Missed the quiet from a facility outside Vancouver where she'd found 23 children being prepared for neural reconstruction." By Christmas, Chen's network was crippled. The man himself had disappeared from federal custody during a prisoner transport, an escape too convenient to be accidental, but Victoria let him go. Chen was a bureaucrat, easily replaced. The real victory lay in the scared, healing children now receiving proper psychiatric care instead of experimental torture. 3 months later, Victoria stood in the Montana snow outside the compound where everything had started, the original facility where she'd first volunteered for memory suppression therapy. The place was abandoned now, computers wiped, research destroyed, but she needed to see it one final time. Inside, walking through empty halls that had once housed her transformation, Victoria felt the integration complete itself. The frightened girl who'd begged for relief from trauma, the weapon she'd chosen to become, the woman who'd found love in a farmhouse and learned that healing was possible without forgetting. All of it was her. All of it was real. Spring returned to Nebraska with a softness that made Victoria's chest ache with recognition. She approached Samuel's farmhouse on foot, having left her stolen motorcycle at the main road. The corn was newly planted, green shoots pushing through rich earth with the patience of things that understood their own time. Samuel was on the porch before she reached the door, as if he'd been watching the horizon for months. He looked older, lines of worry etched deeper around his eyes, but his smile held the same gentle acceptance that had first shown her what safety felt like. "You came back," he said simply. "I promised." Victoria pulled off his jacket, holding it out like an offering. Victoria Martinez keeps her promises. Samuel took the jacket but didn't put it on, instead stepping forward to wrap his arms around her. Victoria let herself sink into the embrace, feeling months of careful control finally release. She was exhausted, bone deep, hollowed out by violence and purpose, but underneath that weariness lay something new. The quiet satisfaction of work completed. "How many?" Samuel asked against her hair. 307 children recovered. 14 facilities destroyed. The network won't recover for years, if ever. Victoria pulled back to meet his eyes. It's finished. Chen's organization is gone. And Victoria Cross? Victoria considered the question, feeling the weight of integrated identity settling into permanent form. She'll always be part of me. The capacity for violence, the willingness to make hard choices, that doesn't disappear. But she's not in charge anymore. Samuel's hands found her face, thumbs tracing the new scars she'd accumulated during her months of hunting. Welcome home, Victoria Martinez. The farmhouse welcomed her like she'd never left. Her coffee mug still sat in the same cabinet. The bedroom where she'd first awakened with no memory held the same quiet peace. But now Victoria brought something new to these familiar spaces, the knowledge that she'd earned the right to rest. That evening, sitting on the porch swing while Samuel finished evening chores, Victoria watched the sunset paint the Nebraska sky in shades of gold and rose. Tomorrow she would help with planting. Next month, maybe they'd talk about expanding the farmhouse, adding rooms for a future neither of them dared name yet. The capacity for violence remained, would always remain. But for the first time in 15 years, Victoria Cross was content to sleep. The new beginning. 6 months later, Victoria woke to the sound of rain on the farmhouse roof and Samuel's steady breathing beside her. The pre-dawn darkness felt different now, peaceful rather than predatory, full of quiet promise instead of lurking threats. She lay still for a moment, cataloging the small miracles of ordinary life, the warmth of shared blankets, the scent of coffee already brewing on the kitchen timer, the absence of hypervigilance that had once made sleep impossible. The nightmares had taken 3 months to fade. Not the memories, those remained integrated and whole, but the adrenaline responses, the automatic reach for weapons that weren't there, the need to check exits and sight lines before she could relax. Samuel had weathered it all with patient understanding, holding her through the bad nights and celebrating each small victory toward normalcy. Victoria slipped from bed, padding barefoot to the kitchen where Samuel was already dressed for morning chores. He handed her a cup of coffee without looking up from the weather report on his tablet, a domestic choreography they'd perfected through repetition and care. Storms passing through, but it should clear by afternoon, he said, then glanced up to study her face. You slept through the night. I did. Victoria smiled, still amazed by the simple accomplishment. No dreams at all. They'd learned to mark these milestones. The first full night's sleep, the first day she didn't instinctively catalog potential weapons in every room, the first time she'd laughed without that brittle edge of someone who'd forgotten how joy was supposed to feel. Each one brought her further back from the person she'd needed to be in the darkness. The expansion to the farmhouse was nearly finished. 2 additional bedrooms and a larger kitchen, built with careful hope and unspoken prayers. Victoria had thrown herself into the physical work, measuring lumber, painting walls, learning the satisfaction of creating instead of destroying. Her hands, which had dealt death with surgical precision, discovered they could also build lasting things. Mrs. Chen called yesterday while you were in town, Samuel said carefully, watching Victoria's reaction. Victoria's hand stilled on her coffee mug. Elena Chen, Dr. Chen's sister, had reached out 3 months ago through official channels. Not about her brother, who remained missing, but about something else entirely. Something that had taken Victoria weeks to decide how to answer. The children's advocate position, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. She said the board approved your application. Unanimous vote. The job offer had been unexpected. Director of a new foundation dedicated to supporting young survivors of trafficking and exploitation. Elena Chen, a prosecutor specializing in organized crime, had followed Victoria's work from a distance and understood both her qualifications and her unique perspective on trauma recovery. I told her I'd need time to think, Victoria said slowly. The position would mean travel, exposure, stepping back into a world adjacent to the darkness she'd worked so hard to leave behind. But it would also mean using her experience to help children heal, instead of simply rescuing them. Samuel set down his tablet, giving her his full attention. What does your gut tell you? Victoria considered the question, testing her motivations with the self-awareness that had become second nature. The old Victoria Cross would have seen it as a strategic opportunity, a way to identify new threats, maintain contacts in law enforcement, keep her skills sharp. But the impulses driving her interest felt different now. That those kids deserve someone who understands, she said finally. Someone who knows that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that trauma can be transformed into strength, that second chances are possible even when you can't remember deserving them. And you want to be that someone? I want to try. Victoria moved to the window, watching rain silver across the cornfields. Not as Victoria Cross hunting monsters, but as Victoria Martinez helping children remember they're more than what was done to them. Samuel joined her at the window, his reflection joining hers in the rain-streaked glass. It means we'd have to move. Washington, D.C. congressional testimony, media attention, people digging into your background. They discussed this reality during long evening conversations on the porch swing. Victoria's past couldn't be completely erased. There were law enforcement files, witness statements, a paper trail of violence that ambitious reporters might eventually uncover. But Elena Chen had assured her the foundation would provide legal protection, and Victoria's cooperation with federal authorities in dismantling Chen's network had earned her considerable goodwill. "The farmhouse will always be here," Victoria said softly. "This place saved my life, gave me back my soul. Maybe it's time to pass that gift forward." Samuel's arms came around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. In the window's reflection, Victoria saw something she'd never expected to possess. A future that stretched beyond the next mission, the next threat, the next violent necessity. She saw a woman who'd learned to build as well as tear down, to nurture as well as protect, to choose hope over fear. "When do we start?" Samuel asked. The question contained multitudes: acceptance, partnership, shared purpose. Victoria leaned back against his chest, feeling the last pieces of her fractured identity settle into their permanent configuration. She was Victoria Martinez, who believed in second chances. She was Victoria Cross, who understood that some battles required terrible choices. She was a woman who'd found love in the aftermath of violence and learned that redemption was possible even for those who'd forgotten how to deserve it. Outside, the storm was already breaking. Sunlight pierced the clouds in golden columns, illuminating the cornfields where everything began. In 2 weeks, they would pack up the farmhouse, leaving it in the care of Samuel's cousin until they could return. Victoria would trade tactical gear for business suits, violence for advocacy, the solitary burden of protection for the shared work of healing. The capacity for violence would always remain, a tool to be used if necessary. But for the first time since she was 19 years old, Victoria Martinez was ready to try building a world where such tools were needed less. The future stretched ahead of them like sunlight breaking through clouds, uncertain but bright with possibility.